down the line towards James, but straight to Ederson. But straight to McTominay, who's going to have a shot. Oh, it's 2-0! Scott McTominay seals the points in the Manchester derby.
If you were to go by last weekend's results, Manchester United seem to be doing just fine.
Ollie's all smiles. He's at the wheel. United are 3 points off the top 4. They lead City by 2-0.
However, doing the double over their cross-city rivals is not enough to mask United's long-term problems that have been in evidence since Sir Alex Ferguson left in 2013.
As far as today's pod is concerned, we'll discuss Manchester United's data-driven plans to catch up with Liverpool and Manchester City.
In a bid to offset the gap that exists between the club and the challengers at the top of the Premier League table, Manchester United announced the imminent creation of a data analytics department.
United are setting up an analytics team. They hope in time to get to a team of 8 people that will be their own sort of research group.
In this episode, we look at the impact that statistical analysis could have on Manchester United and assess the broader context of analysis as it exists in the Premier League already.
I guess initially I was quite surprised, mainly because United are traditionally kind of a bit more behind Liverpool and Man City.
Tom Worville is football analytics writer for The Athletic.
And then it was also, who's actually going to get this role, because there's people in clubs internationally in the Premier League who may be suitable for it, but equally, could the Glazers go down kind of the US sports route and get someone from a kind of McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group background who've kind of brought analytics into a large company?
I wonder if you could clarify a point that seems to have confused a number of people. Manchester United already do analysis, and they were at pains to point that out in the Athletic podcast where the topic was treated. So what is going to be different about this new department that they're setting up?
I thought I'd start this answer to this question with kind of like a definition of football analysis, which to me is the quantitative and qualitative kind of analysis of performance of players and teams. Yeah, Man United do football analysis in terms of, they do look at basic statistics and they do look at a lot of video, but the beefing out of this kind of like football analytics department means that they will be kind of like adding to the, the quantitative element of that. So, I think that, yes, they do analysis, but analytics may be something they do differently. Teams, like Man United have always used data. They use basic stuff, possession percentage, shots, maybe something a bit more advanced. But, analytics at the club is going to be focused on using the raw data, large data sets, what people probably deem big data, to get, better models, metrics of things that measure the game more accurately and using them in their decision making.
When David Ornstein broke the news about this new department, he said that, quote, the new department will use data to profile potential targets as well as contribute to United's academy and medical teams. What would the day-to-day tasks of this department look like?
I think this department is going to touch on various different areas within the club. Recruitment, like they mentioned, will be around player profiling. The academy side, teams are now kind of touching on the academies and looking at academies as kind of means of increasing the value of their assets. Players in their academies are their assets, and they need to increase the value if they want to either produce good players or sell them on for a profit. So this analytics department could help with that. Could they help find, better loan destinations for players, things like that? On the medical side, injury, maybe not prevention, but how can they look to manage players better, manage rest better? And then in terms of performance, can they get more insight into, opposition analysis? How do you find the strengths and weaknesses of the opponents through data and not through more qualitative measures?
Is there any clear sense of what the department will look like when it's finally launched? How many people are they going to have involved in this? What sort of roles will they be looking to fill? And what are the tasks that they will be performing on top of that?
For now, all we know is that there's probably going to be, the head of analytics and then 7 or 8 positions potentially beneath that. And to me, those 7 or 8 roles beneath the head of analytics need to be of different functions. I've always thought kind of the best way to build out this department is kind of like building a squad of players. So to start with, you've got kind of your data engineers who are your back line. They kind of, give you a solid base to build from. They'll build out a central database. They'll help you automate the boring stuff and essentially give you a solid base to build out from. You've then got data analysts who are kind of your number 8s, your box-to-box midfielders, and they are helping answer, a lot of ad hoc queries and requests being someone with a different set of skills in the club that many are used to, you'll get pulled in different directions. And you kind of need these analysts to kind of protect the back line and feed the front line, as it were. And the front line in this case will be the data scientists who will make new metrics and models and ways of thinking about the game, push those to the engineers who can kind of automate them, and push those to the data analysts who can kind of distribute them throughout the club.
You've got to get that data from the squad itself to the coaching staff and the management team. Do you think they'll have someone who will work as a go-between, who will be able to explain in lay people's terms those data findings that they have?
Yeah, I've always thought the kind of data analyst role is maybe the most key one, because they're the ones that will translate those insights into the language of the coaching staff and make sure that it gets bought in. The Houston Astros did this where they kind of embedded coaches who could, pitch, but they could also use SQL and find these insights themselves and give them to the coaching staff. And they did that to kind of create this data culture from the ground up. And yet, those people are really important to embed the use of more objective data throughout the team.
Can you give us a sense of what sort of impact the club could expect from having a department like this?
Ian Graham, who's the head of kind of this research group at Liverpool, said at a conference in Barcelona in November that actually most of the gains you'll get from doing this kind of work will be off the field in terms of recruitment. Because if I spent a whole year working as an analyst or scientist in a club on recruitment, I could stop us from making a £40 million mistake. If I did the same, trying to work on kind of performance measures and helping us win more points, I might win us 1, maybe 2 points maximum, and that's maybe £4 to £5 million.
The best one-on-one defender for a fullback in the world. I don't think anyone will be able to get the best of him 1v1.
There was a suggestion in the Ornstein and Chapman podcast that, for example, Aaron Wan-Bissaka wouldn't have been purchased if there was any use of data in the recruitment process. Do you agree with that?
I think the Wan-Bissaka one's really interesting because on paper, I can't really think of another signing of a player who is so defensively minded and so good in one-on-one situations, going to a team where he's going to have a lot more of the ball and be required to defend a lot less. So from a player fit point of view, it didn't really make a ton of sense. Now, on the flip side, yes, he's English. He kind of fits that, English quota, and he's definitely improved in recent weeks in his production in the final third. But, on paper, it didn't make a ton of sense.
How long would you say that it would take a department like this to get up and running? Because it's obviously not the case that you just set up a department with 8 people in and suddenly the output is perfect from the off. So how long would you suggest that it will take before it's really at capacity?
I think we'd say years probably to get a complete kind of like cultural shift that everyone's using data. If you want to use it on the recruitment side, I reckon you could maybe get some value out of it within a transfer window. For example, Benfica have a data scientist who goes by the name of Suds Gopal-Desakan, and he said at a conference that he was there at Benfica for 3 years before he got any kind of like real coach buy-in. It's a lot of battles you have to get your voice heard and get your insights actually used. And I think that the quicker that teams and people within the club can get buy-in, the more likely this department's going to have success.
There's also the fact that other departments have got a significant head start and have done over them for many years now. Would you expect Manchester United's analytics department to ever catch up with Liverpool's, for example?
It's possible, but very, very unlikely. Liverpool have an owner in John Henry who comes from baseball, comes from a very data-driven sporting culture as is. Man United don't really have that. And I think that it would take a long time to kind of have that organisational change take place. Yes, they could get to a level where they're hiring a similar amount of people and they have the similar amount of buy-in, but there's so much difference at those top levels between United with Ed Woodward and Liverpool with Henry in these more senior positions. And Michael Edwards, I guess, at Liverpool, such that I just don't really think that those are possible within, finite timescales.
And what else needs to be in place for the club for this sort of department to function correctly? Could you have a data department without a director of football, for example? And where do you think that this department will fit in within the hierarchy?
Clubs are very, very siloed. You can have training grounds where the recruitment department will share a wall with the analysis department, but they'll never talk. They might meet kind of once a week. And I think that you need to have someone who sits above those and gets them talking, get them sharing ideas and using this data. And you really need a director of football type to ensure that buy-in takes place.
To what extent do you think this is being treated by Manchester United as a golden bullet? Do you think that they are going to take the analytics side of things seriously, or do you think this is just another way of them having plausible deniability for when something inevitably goes wrong further down the line?
Without a director of football, this may or may not work, but a lot of the clubs where you see that there are football analytics departments, there is also a director of football in place. Leicester, for example, Arsenal have a largish department. Man City has a department that's kind of seen and not heard. And, all of these places have director of football or someone in a role similar to that. And, to different extents, they are getting buy-in.
How successful do you anticipate this project being for Manchester United then?
I do wonder how much of this is born out of Ed Woodward looking at the track record of United in terms of the transfer market in the last 10 years and thinking things have got to change. You see all the numbers around, how much United have spent and recouped in this time, and something does have to change. And so for that reason, I don't think this is a vanity hire. I do think it is a hire that they need to bring their level up, and they're making the necessary steps to do that.
So that's what the situation is like at Manchester United. But what is it like across the Premier League in general?
I don't really think it's normal on the whole. There are some clubs which may have the odd kind of like data analyst or data scientist, and to my mind only really, Manchester City, Leicester, Arsenal, Liverpool have like dedicated department or people there. So there's not a ton of like widespread departments across the Premier League.
So which clubs do you think have the best analytics department in the country then, and what makes them so good?
Liverpool gets spoken about a lot, and they've had a lot of positive press recently. A New York Times article interviewed Ian Graham and kind of maybe slightly biased, but showed the value that he's added. And I think that, that's probably right. Liverpool have a very kind of like large and listened to research group. But then you do have Manchester City that do have a fairly large team that we don't see or hear of, but from speaking to people at the club, do have an impact and are being used. Arsenal is probably the most unique organisation out of the few teams that have this analytics group because they collect their own data. All these other clubs kind of like take data from third-party suppliers, and Arsenal have a massive data collection process taking in place in Laos in Asia, and that means that they can completely dictate what they collect, what leagues they collect it on, what age levels, etc. So theirs is probably the most unique department and has the biggest potential to have really, really big impact.
You mentioned third-party data companies providing data. What kind of benefit do you think you get from collecting your own data, other than you can obviously gear it in the direction that you want it to do? Do you think that clubs eventually will all be doing that?
I worked at Opta for 3 or 4 years and really saw how data is collected in football, and there are certain things as an analyst you want Opta to collect that they don't for one reason or another. And I think that if you own that data collection process, then you can completely decide what you want to measure and what matters. So much of analytics is there's so much we could measure. I think a key thing with analytics and getting it right is deciding on what exactly to measure and what's important. Measuring what's important is probably the key thing of, is what successful analytics departments do. Do I think that a lot of clubs will do that in the future? No, purely because it's so expensive. Arsenal made a bit of a gamble buying this department and probably have got return on investment from it, but not many other clubs have the budget to go out and buy large data collection companies.
What do you think is the best structure into which a club can fit an analytics department? We've already touched on this a little bit. What do you think the structural hierarchy at a club has to look like for these departments to have any clout?
I think you need buy-in at the top. You need buy-in with a director of football or a chairman or a CEO, because if they're fighting your corner and showing that you add value, then there's less struggle that you potentially need to go through with coaches or other people slightly further down the food chain. And I think that Milan Solmaz, who's the head of analytics at Leicester, has gone in and kind of got that. He's got the ear of John Rudkin, who's the director of football. He is meeting with Brendan Rodgers. He has a lot of buy-in within the club. Buy-in, something that I kind of keep mentioning, but it is just so key, because if you don't have buy-in, a lot of your work is pointless and you kind of might as well not bother.
Brendan Rodgers is a name you just mentioned there, but he seems to be quite keen on the whole idea of analytics in sport. How important is it for a manager to be able to hold those conversations and also push the club towards adopting these sorts of approaches?
I think with Rodgers, it's really important because it shows that he's interested in listening to other perspectives and other ideas, and you don't really get this authoritarian reign that you might get with managers at other clubs who know everything and what they say is completely right. So I think just like from assessing a manager, I think it's really positive that he's someone who is open-minded in that case.
What do you think are the most demanding hurdles faced by analysts at football clubs?
I think there are a few, and they kind of go in chronological order. The first is, of course, getting buy-in again. The second one is just supply meeting demand. As soon as you've got buy-in and people understand like the value you can add. I'll take my kind of new role at The Athletic, for example. A lot of writers want to use stats. They want to use stats better. As soon as they realise someone's in the company who understands this stuff to a reasonably good level, they want a piece of it and they want to be able to use it for their own pieces. That would be the exact same thing that would happen in a club. You have the academy guys wanting to use data better, you have the medical guys wanting to use data better. So it's being able to field that, all that requests on your time and be able to meet expectations. And additionally, it's probably being able to say no and focusing on what's important. Again, I said earlier, if you can work for a year in a recruitment department and stop a £40 million mistake, it's probably a better use of your time versus the opportunity cost of, focusing on league position, performance, and maybe getting one extra point in the league.
Is there any sense you think that football clubs set up analytics departments just to cover their back and then fail to take notice of any of their findings?
Potentially not. I think that there are certain clubs which have analysts or scientists which maybe don't have the level of buy-in, but they've not really hired them as the all singing or all dancing kind of head of a certain department. Fulham are an interesting club where they have this kind of now probably infamous 2 ticks or 2 boxes policy with transfers where the player needs to meet the scouting side and they also need to meet the data side. But having some insight to kind of the data side of that, and hearing what they say, the data said that this player is right. The data doesn't really say anything. It's your interpretation of the data, which is what matters at the end of the day. And I think that kind of using analytics on numbers as a fall and points to them as a reason for a mistake isn't really fair. It's got to come back to the people at the end of the day who are making those decisions.
What concrete impact do you think a good analytics department has on a football club?
Sustainability and decision making. I think that analytics kind of pushes people to use evidence when making decisions. I don't think that's commonplace in football. Something I refer to a lot is that common sense isn't always common practice. Like buying players that fit your style of play because they're less of a risk seems like a major brainwave when you speak to certain people in clubs. So I think that analytics is very much at times a way of thinking through and using evidence to back up the decision you're about to make.
I wonder if I could throw in a question about tactics actually at this point, because obviously a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is how does a player fit in with the style of play, etc. How important do you think it is to have analysts who are au fait with tactical ideas rather than just guys who are good at numbers?
Yeah, I think that if the numbers aren't really measuring what the coaches want to see or are nuanced enough to take into account the tactical demands of a player or a role, it's kind of for nothing. You could have a player who is great at scoring goals. There was a great example at this OptaPro conference in Germany last year. Alex Klein, who is the data scientist at Southampton, said, you could have a player who actually scores loads of goals, but actually that isn't always what you want from a player. It's not necessarily the best thing. Jordan Rhodes is maybe an example of that in the Championship, who earlier in his career would go and score goals anywhere he played, but if the other elements of your game aren't good enough, then you maybe won't fit into a tactical system.
Reminds me of Patrick Bamford as well.
That's probably another podcast entirely. But if the numbers are telling you one thing, that a player's a really good goal scorer, you're maybe being blind to the other things that a player does, which are also important.
I hate to bring up Moneyball because it's such a cliche thing to bring up, but one of the central tenets of Moneyball is that you look for undervalued assets within a data set. In baseball now, the Moneyball approach has essentially diminished because all clubs are valuing assets much more effectively than they were. Do you think a similar phenomenon will happen in football as more and more analytics departments appear?
Having thought about this, I think that the answer is probably no. Major League Baseball only has 30 teams. It's a very kind of insular league, and football is very global right now. You have clubs like Man City, who are owned by City Football Group, who kind of hoover up all that talent and have a kind of farm-based system, maybe similar to baseball, but not all teams have the resources to do that. And I think that there will always be people in the market who are being inefficient with their means of evaluating talent, and therefore the kind of Moneyball approach will always have Moneyball approach here being kind of using data to find players that are undervalued by the market will kind of always be something in football, at least within our lifetimes, I expect. So
is data analysis here to stay in the Premier League then?
Absolutely. I really hope so, otherwise I'm probably going to have to look for another job in another industry.
You can read all of Tom Worville's writing on football analytics over at The Athletic. This episode was produced by Josh Schneider-Weiler and Hugo Chambray. I'm John Mackenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today. If you enjoy this podcast, why not rate and review it on iTunes or share an episode with a friend? See you next time.